The invitation to my father's 40th anniversary gala said Whitfield Construction and Development, 4 decades of building trust. My name wasn't on it. Not because they forgot me, because they'd learned over the years exactly where to put me so I wouldn't need to be explained. "Captain Cade," the valet said when I pulled up in my rental sedan, squinting at the guest list, "I don't see you here, ma'am." "Try Sophia Whitfield." He found it 2 lines down, tucked under staff and family support. I almost laughed. Almost. I'd flown 14 hours from Fort Bragg for this, 11 years in the Army, the last 6 with Army Criminal Investigation Command, CID, chasing fraud rings, black market weapons deals, and the kind of men who smile while they ruin people. I'd learned to read a room before I ever stepped into it. That skill didn't turn off just because the room was full of chandeliers instead of cartel accountants. My mother, Linda, met me at the door in a dress that cost more than my monthly housing allowance. She kissed my cheek without quite touching it. "You came." Not, "I'm glad you're here," just confirmation that I hadn't embarrassed her by staying away. "I said I would." "You look tired." "I flew all night." "Well," she smoothed an invisible wrinkle from my sleeve, "try to look rested. There are people here tonight who matter." Inside, 400 guests moved through a ballroom my father had rented to prove something to men who doubted he could ever build past his first contract. Everett Whitfield had turned a single crew of 6 into a firm with offices in 3 states, and tonight was supposed to be the victory lap. He found me near the bar, already working the room like a man closing a deal. "There she is," he clapped my shoulder the way he'd clap a business partner's. "You look sharp. Tell people you're a consultant. Simpler than explaining the Army thing." "The Army thing is my job, Dad." I know. He was already looking past me, toward a senator's aide crossing the floor. "Just, tonight isn't the night, okay?" It never was. My older sister Claire found me by the dessert table 20 minutes later, and for the first time all evening, someone actually looked happy to see me. "You're here!" She hugged me hard enough that champagne sloshed in my glass. "I told Ryan you'd come." Ryan, her husband, Vice President of Business Development, according to his card, a title my father had handed him 3 years into the marriage, mostly because Ryan asked for it loudly enough and often enough. I liked Claire. I'd never quite trusted Ryan. It wasn't anything I could put in a report, just details. The way he checked his phone under the table during dinners, jaw tightening at whatever he saw. The way he'd started avoiding my eyes at family gatherings, like eye contact might reveal too much. 6 years of interviewing people who were lying to me taught me what a lie sitting in a man's shoulders looked like, and Ryan's shoulders had been carrying one for months. "Where is he?" I asked. Claire's smile flickered. "Making a call, work stuff." "At 9 at night? At his own company's anniversary party?" "Sophia," her voice went quiet, the way it used to when we were kids and she wanted me to drop something before Dad noticed we were talking about it. "Don't." I let it go. That was my first mistake. I found Ryan 20 minutes later on the back loading dock behind the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and clipped in a way I'd heard from 100 men trying not to sound afraid. "I told you, the payment's coming. I just need until the end of the quarter." He saw me and went white. "Sophia, hey, just a vendor thing." He ended the call so fast his thumb slipped twice. "A vendor made you sweat through your tux?" "It's fine." He straightened his jacket like it could straighten his voice, too. "Corporate stuff, you wouldn't—" Stop himself. "Wouldn't understand?" That's not what I meant. But it was. It was always what they meant. I should have pushed. Instead, a man I didn't recognize stepped out from behind a parked delivery van at the edge of the lot, mid-50s, gray wool coat too heavy for the season, watching the loading dock like he was memorizing exits. He met my eyes for exactly 1 second. Not the accidental glance of a stranger, the deliberate assessing look of someone checking whether he'd been made. Then he turned and walked into the dark like he had somewhere better to be. Ryan, who was that? Who was who? He was already walking back toward the ballroom, shoulders up around his ears. I caught my father alone near the coat check an hour later and told him what I saw. The phone call, the man in the gray coat, the way Ryan's whole body had gone rigid. My father listened with the patient, indulgent expression he used for interns pitching bad ideas. Sophia, you've been doing this job too long. Everybody looks suspicious to you now. Dad, I'm telling you. Sophia, Ryan handles vendors who don't pay on time. That's not a conspiracy. That's Tuesday. He squeezed my arm, already turning away. Go enjoy the party. For one night, can you just be my daughter instead of an investigator? I watched him walk back into the light and the music, and I thought about the man in the gray coat and the sentence Ryan said before he caught himself. I just need until the end of the quarter. Until the end of the quarter for what? I didn't know yet, but I intended to find out, with or without an invitation. I gave it 2 days before I started pulling threads. Old habits. CID doesn't really let you retire the instinct to verify. It just changes what you're allowed to point it at. I wasn't on duty. I wasn't authorized. I did it anyway. Quietly, from the guest room of my parents' house, using nothing but public records, a laptop, and every trick I'd learned building fraud cases against men who thought paperwork was invisible. Whitfield Construction had taken out 3 loans in the past 14 months. 2 were ordinary, bank financing, standard terms, nothing unusual for a company scaling into new states. The 3rd loan wasn't from a bank at all. It came from a private lending entity called Callaway Capital Partners, and it had exactly one listed officer, Victor Callaway. I'd heard that name before. Not for my family, from a fraud bulletin 2 years earlier flagging Callaway as a person of interest in a predatory lending scheme that had quietly bankrupted 3 small businesses in the Carolinas, men who'd borrowed against their own company to survive a bad quarter and lost everything when Callaway called the note early and seized the collateral through a clause buried on page 40 of a 100-page agreement. The loan to Whitfield Construction was for $2 million. The collateral wasn't just the company. It was the company, my parents' house, and, I had to read the clause twice to believe it, Claire and Ryan's joint accounts, including the education trust they'd set up for their 8-year-old daughter, Nora. Ryan hadn't just borrowed against the business, he'd bet his own daughter's college fund on it, without telling his wife, and the man he'd borrowed from had a documented history of taking everything the second a payment was late. I found Claire alone on the back porch the next afternoon, watching Nora do cartwheels on the lawn, and I told her everything. She didn't yell, she went very still, the way people do right before the floor actually gives out. He told me it was a bridge loan from the bank. It's not a bank, Claire. It's a man who's done this before. Why would he... She pressed her hand over her mouth. Nora's fund? He used Nora's fund? I need to talk to him. Tonight, before the next payment's due. I want to know exactly what he signed and when. That evening, Ryan didn't just deny it. He came apart. You had no right to go digging through my finances. I found public filings, Ryan. That's not digging. That's Tuesday afternoon research. The question is why he didn't tell anyone the collateral included your daughter's trust. Because I was going to fix it. His voice cracked on the last word. The company had a bad year. Dad wouldn't authorize emergency financing through normal channels, he said. Optics matter more than cash flow. So I found someone who could move fast. I didn't know what Callaway actually was until it was already signed. And the man in the gray coat at the gala. Ryan's face went the color of the tablecloth. He said it was a courtesy visit to remind me the next payment's due Friday. He said if it's late again, they don't wait for lawyers. They just start taking things. Again? This has happened before? Once. Small.
I covered it out of my own account before anyone noticed. My father, who'd walked in halfway through and gone quiet in the doorway, finally spoke. "You mortgaged Nora's future and you didn't tell me." "I was protecting the company you built. I was trying to be the son you never had instead of the son-in-law you tolerated." The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with recognition. My father recognizing for the first time that the pressure he'd put on Ryan to perform, to prove himself, to never bring problems to the table without solutions already attached, had pushed a desperate man toward exactly the kind of predator I'd spent 6 years building cases against. "How much is due Friday?" I asked. $400,000. If we're a day late, the acceleration clause lets him seize the house and the trust immediately. No court date required. He wrote it that way on purpose. "Then we're not going to be late," I said, "but we're also not paying him. Men like Calloway don't stop once you've proven you'll pay. They come back for more. We're going to end this on Friday, all the way." My father, for the first time in longer than I could remember, didn't argue with me. How? "Give me until Friday. And Dad, this time actually let me be the investigator." He looked at me for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Show me." I didn't know yet that Calloway wouldn't wait quietly for Friday. Men who write acceleration clauses into contracts don't like the sound of a family getting organized. 2 nights later, at 9:40 on a Wednesday, a car with no plates parked outside Claire and Ryan's house for 11 minutes, engine running, before it pulled away, and Nora came home from a friend's the next afternoon, insisting a strange man in a gray coat had walked past her at the bus stop and called her by name. That was when I stopped investigating quietly and started moving like it was a mission. Nora calling a stranger's face familiar was the only warning I needed. I moved Claire, Ryan, and Nora into my parents' house that same night. One address, controllable sightlines, a single point of entry I could actually secure, instead of 3 houses spread across town. My father didn't ask permission before I made the call. He just made room. I spent the night walking the property the way I used to walk a perimeter downrange, checking sight lines from the tree line, testing the motion sensor lights, memorizing which floorboards on the porch gave a warning creak. My mother watched me from the kitchen window with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not disapproval, something closer to recognition, like she was seeing a version of her daughter she'd spent years refusing to look at directly. Calloway made his move Thursday night, the day before the payment deadline, which told me everything about the kind of man he was. He didn't want to collect on Friday. He wanted to make an example before Friday, so the family would beg to pay him early just to make him go away. 2 men came through the tree line at 11:20 p.m. I'd expected exactly that, an intimidation visit, not a full assault, because Calloway's business model depended on fear, not bodies. Fear is reusable. Bodies bring police. I met them at the edge of the porch light before they reached the door, standing where they could see my hands were empty and my voice was calm, because the fastest way to de-escalate a man who's expecting panic is to give him competence instead. "You're on private property and you're already on camera." The taller one, the man in the gray coat from the loading dock, up close now, older than he looked at a distance, smiled the way men like him always smile when they think an unarmed woman is bluffing. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now. My name's Sophia Whitfield. I'm also Special Agent Whitfield, Army Criminal Investigation Division, and I've spent 6 years building fraud cases against men who write acceleration clauses the way your employer does. I know exactly what Calloway Capital is because I read the bulletin with his name on it 2 years ago." That landed. His posture shifted. Not fear, but recalculation, the look of a man realizing the math had changed. "I don't know what you think you know." "I know the loan to this family violates state usury caps by 9 points, which makes the whole agreement unenforceable in civil court. I know Calloway's last 3 seizures are already under review by the State Attorney General's Finance Crimes Unit. I checked this afternoon, and there's an open file with your employer's name on it. And I know that whatever he's paying you to stand on this lawn at 11 at night isn't worth becoming Exhibit 2 in that file.
The second man, younger, had already started backing toward the tree line. Fear is contagious when it's someone else's fear you're catching, and he didn't like the math either. You're bluffing. Call him. Ask him about the file. See how fast he tells you to leave. He didn't call. He didn't need to. Some part of him had already run the numbers and didn't like the answer. He turned and walked back into the dark, and this time his partner didn't linger to save face. He just followed. I didn't sleep after they left. I sat on the porch steps with my father until sunrise, going through everything I'd found. The usury violation, the open attorney general's file, 3 other families Calloway had already destroyed who might be willing to testify if someone finally built the case properly. You did this in 2 days, my father said quietly, somewhere around 4 a.m. I've done bigger cases in less time. This is what I actually do, Dad. It was never chairs and logistics. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had none of the confidence I'd grown up hearing across boardrooms and dinner tables. I told you not to make tonight about yourself. Every time. For years. I think I was the one making everything about myself, and I just didn't have the courage to notice. I didn't have a clean response for that, so I didn't give him one. Some things don't need an answer in the moment. They need to sit, the way a diagnosis sits before treatment starts. Friday morning, instead of a payment, I had our family's attorney file a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office, citing the usury violation and attaching the 3 prior victims I tracked down overnight, 2 of whom agreed to go on record the moment they heard they weren't alone. Calloway called the house himself at 10 a.m., voice tight in a way I recognized. Not the voice of a predator in control, but a man who'd borrowed against his own operation from someone worse than himself and had been counting on the Whitfield payment to cover it. You have no idea what you've started, he told me. I have a very specific idea, I said. I build cases against men exactly like you for a living. You're not the first, and the state's opening a file with your name and 3 other families on it by end of day. If I were you, I'd spend less time threatening an 8-year-old at a bus stop and more time finding a lawyer. He hung up. He didn't call back Friday, or the week after. 6 weeks later, the Attorney General's office filed formal charges against Calloway Capital Partners for predatory lending and racketeering, citing 4 separate victims, Whitfield Construction among them, no longer as prey, but as the family whose complaint had finally made the case airtight. I hadn't rescued anyone with a weapon or a convoy of federal agents. I'd done it the way I'd spent 6 years learning to do it, patiently, on paper, with a case built so tightly the predator had nowhere left to stand. The morning after the charges were filed, the house felt different in a way I couldn't have described to anyone who hadn't lived it. Quieter, but not the heavy kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a storm actually passes instead of just pausing. Ryan didn't get a clean redemption arc, and I didn't try to give him one. What he'd done wasn't a mistake made in a single bad moment. It was months of decisions, each one small enough to justify, that added up to gambling his daughter's future without telling the person who trusted him most. Claire needed time to decide what that meant for her marriage, and I didn't push her toward forgiveness or away from it. That wasn't mine to decide. What Ryan did do, 3 days after the charges were filed, was sit down with Claire and a financial counselor and lay out every account, every debt, every decision, without me or my father in the room to make him. He came to me afterwards, not for absolution, but with something more useful. I don't expect you to think differently of me, he said. I just wanted you to know I told her everything, all of it. Not the version that makes me look like I was trying to save the company. The version where I was also trying to prove something to your father that he never actually asked me to prove. "That's not nothing," I said, and I meant it. It wasn't forgiveness. It was honesty, which is usually the harder thing to offer first. My mother found me packing for my flight back to Bragg 2 days later. She stood in the doorway for a while before she spoke. "I used to tell people your job was complicated because I didn't understand it. I think the truth is I didn't understand it because I never let myself ask. You could ask now." She sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since I was a teenager, my mother actually asked me questions about my work, not to make conversation, but because she wanted the answers. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was smaller than that, and more real for being small. Claire drove me to the airport. Nora rode in the back seat, drawing on a sketch pad, and when I turned to say goodbye, she held it up, a crayon drawing of a woman in uniform standing in front of a house, labeled in careful 8-year-old handwriting, "Aunt Sophia keeps us safe." "She's been telling her whole class you're a spy," Claire said, half laughing, half not. "I'm really not. I know, but I think it's the first time she's ever had a hero in the family who wasn't made up." Claire's voice caught. "I should have believed you sooner about Ryan. About all of it. You believed me the second it mattered. That's the part that actually counts." 4 months later, my father called to ask if I'd come for Thanksgiving. Not the gala, not an anniversary event with 400 guests and a guest list that filed me under staff. Just dinner. "There's a seat with your name on it this time," he said. "Actual place card. I checked twice." I laughed, and something in my chest that had been braced for years finally eased. The house looked the same when I pulled in. Same porch, same tree line I'd walked at midnight watching for headlights that had no plates. But something about walking up to the door felt different this time, and it took me until I was halfway up the steps to understand why. I wasn't bracing for the moment they'd remind me where I actually belonged. I was just coming home. Dinner was ordinary in the best way. Nora insisted on sitting next to me and asking increasingly specific questions about whether I'd ever defused an actual bomb, which I had to keep gently correcting. CID handles fraud and violent crime investigations, not ordnance, though I let her believe the cooler version a little longer than strictly accurate. Ryan and Claire were still working things out, quietly, in the specific, unglamorous way real repair actually happens. Couples counseling, separate accounts rebuilt from scratch, no dramatic reconciliation speech, just two people doing the slow work of finding out if trust could be rebuilt one honest year at a time. My father stood up before dessert, tapping his glass the way he used to at company events, and for a second the old instinct in me tensed, expecting a toast that would once again explain me to a room instead of simply including me in it. "I've given a lot of toasts in this house," he said. "Most of them were about the company. Tonight I want to give one about my daughter, and I want to actually get it right this time." He looked at me, and there was none of the performance in it that used to accompany every introduction he'd ever made. For a long time, I thought success looked like a building with my name on it, or a room full of people impressed enough to shake my hand. I had a daughter who spent 6 years learning how to find the truth in situations where everyone else was already fooled, and I filed that under logistics because it didn't fit the story I was telling about my own life. He raised his glass. "I don't get those years back, I know that, but I'd like the chance to actually know you going forward instead of just explaining you." It wasn't the speech I'd have written for him 3 years ago, back when I still imagined this moment would feel like vindication. It felt like something quieter and sturdier than that, an actual account offered without asking me to make it easy for him. "I'd like that too," I said, and meant it. I flew back to Bragg 3 weeks later, and 3 weeks after that, I took my father up on the offer in a form neither of us had quite pictured. Not a full-time role, not a title on a wall, but a standing arrangement where Whitfield Construction ran every major financing decision past an actual fraud specialist before signing anything, and that specialist happened to be his daughter, paid at her normal consulting rate, credited by name in every report.
Calloway pled guilty to racketeering and predatory lending, along with 3 other counts tied to the families I'd tracked down that first sleepless night. He wasn't the last man like him I'd ever build a case against. That was simply the job, and I intended to keep doing it, uniform or not, whether or not anyone at a gala ever read my rank off a place card correctly. But I stopped needing them to. That was the part that actually changed. Some families learn to see the people in them all at once in a single dramatic moment under bright lights. Mine learned slower than that. One honest conversation, one changed org chart, one actual place card at a time. It wasn't the redemption I used to imagine as a kid setting up folding chairs nobody thanked me for moving. It was better because it was earned instead of staged. And when Nora asked me that Thanksgiving what the bravest thing I'd ever done was, I didn't tell her about the Calloway's men on the lawn. I told her it was staying in the room long enough to let my family actually learn who I was, instead of walking away the first time they got it wrong. She thought about that for a long moment in the serious way 8-year-olds sometimes surprise you with. "That's harder than the bomb thing," she said. "Yeah, by a lot."